Greetings for another Z-Files out on the road. Today we are in Woodstock, Georgia. And if you've been watching and listening to Z-Files over the past couple of months, you know that one of my visits to the Atlanta Braves, and had some time free, traveled up to my old historic Highway 41, found what they were doing in Kennesaw, and while I was shooting video of that big apartment building and some guy walked up to me while I was out in front of the General Museum and said, "You need to go see what they're doing in Woodstock." I did, and that's why I'm here. Because, and I've also brought with me Trae Duley from the City of Crestview. You may hear his voice in the background a time or two with a question. I went back and told him about it, and I said, this would make a great field trip. Finally, Teresa Gagliard, his boss lady, agreed, yep. So we had a good Braves game on Sunday afternoon. We came up and we toured. Trae had a chance to see Woodstock, and I love the idea that they were able to build a tunnel under that railroad tracks, and we'll talk about that in future broadcasts for Crestview. We're up here now with Brian Stockton, who is the Director of Economic Development and the Downtown Development Authority for Woodstock, Georgia. And I appreciate your taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
And so you've been with the city of Woodstock now for quite a while. How long have you been involved here in your different jobs?
I have been. I've been with the city since 2006, first as city planner until about 2013, and moved over into economic development since then.
Okay. So were you here when the big buildings was East Main even in existence at one time? Was there always two main streets, or was that part of the new downtown thing you did?
There's always been an East Main Street. It was a very narrow two-lane road, though, at the time. And when the developer came in the early 2000s, 2004 timeframe to start that development, they fixed it up and made it the one-way street that you see it is today with the parking on it. So It's always been there. When I started, the condo building, which I believe is 5 stories tall, was about 2 stories tall under construction. So I wasn't there for the very beginning planning stages of it, but got to see it, finished.
So was the idea of having these condos and all the shops on the east side of the railroad track, and you're having the East Main Street, and then you've got the rest of the old depot, and then the other buildings there? Was that something that the city came up with, or a developer came to you with, and how did that happen?
Yeah, so in the state of Georgia, we've got regional planning commissions that each county is a part of, and the one that we're in is actually the Atlanta Regional Commission. We're the furthest north county in that 13, I believe, for planning purposes, it's 13 counties. And they've got a grant program called the Livable Centers Initiative. We'll refer to it as LCI. And any community can go out when they have planning studies. Any community can go out and apply for planning studies, and they focus either on existing downtowns or on corridors, and trying to get livability back into places where you couldn't really have, by old zoning standards, you can't have people living in your central business district or in your commercial corridor or whatever. So we applied and went through that process in 2002, and that's really what you see today as far as the development goes. Came out of that very public process where the public did say, we want to grow downtown, we don't mind people living downtown, all of that kind of stuff. So in 2002, they went through that process, got that plan approved. It's sort of like a small area plan or a small master plan. It's not a comprehensive plan for the entire city. It just looks at one particular segment and comes up with recommendations for that. In 2003 or 4, a developer put 32 acres under contract in that East Main Street area. There's only about 8 parcels. They were larger parcels with manufactured housing on them. The train depot, there were 2 small 2-story office buildings, and there's a 100-year-old house that has a restaurant in it today called the Century House Tavern. Those were the only existing structures on the property that remained. The Ace Hardware that you see there is not within the project. He hasn't sold for redevelopment. So they put that in there, and they were kind of your standard suburban, cul-de-sac, big houses, big lot type developer, but they had a really good vision between it. It was a husband and wife team called Hedgewood Properties. They came in, they put the 32 acres, they sort of came in with a site plan that was more suburban in nature, and our community development director at the time sent them back with the LCI study and said, here's what the vision of Woodstock is that we just went through a couple years ago, really go back and take your 32 acres in your design because it's right downtown and focus it based on this. And that's when they came back with the more integrated mixed use and commercial development that you see there today.
So all of the houses and I guess like townhomes that are on the backside or east of the downtown condos and the beautiful park you built, is all that part of that 32-acre project?
It was. The 32 acres is split up into it was supposed to be about 80,000 square feet of commercial space. I don't think they quite got there because there's some buildings that didn't get built, and about 300 residential units. So it includes the for sale condos, it includes the townhomes and the single family houses that you see today. And all the green space that's back there, including the big park, is actually it's not a public park. It's privately maintained and owned by their HOA. So
wow.
About 20% of the 32 acres is open space.
Okay. Yeah, I walked around. The first time I came over, the day that the fellow and I met, I was actually standing, I think, between the depot and in the General Museum, and some guy walked up who lives over this way, and I told him what I was seeing, and he said that he's going to send me over here to see this. I had been in Woodstock in the 80s when I was in a company down in Atlanta, and one of my employees lived up here, and I don't think there was much more than what's along the other side of the tracks back in the 80s.
Right, that's about right. Historically, it's been about 3 blocks of kind of historic, buildings, and Woodstock, it's a lot like what you were just mentioning, where it was a train stop that brought cotton into Atlanta. So we had a rope mill up here off the river about 2 miles north, and there were a bunch of cotton warehouses that you don't see today along the railroad track on Main Street. And that's sort of the very brief history of Woodstock. So it was a very one-sided, railroad street and historic buildings for about 3 blocks.
In round numbers, before all of this project was done, what would you estimate the taxable value of that 32 acres and this whole thing was, and what would you say it is now in round numbers?
I was supposed to look that up for you, and I didn't get it, so I'll have to answer that question for you later.
Okay.
I do have that.
And I have to assume it's in the millions of dollars difference.
Yeah. Well, any mixed-use development, when you're stacking properties on top of properties and cramming them in there, you are going to generate more taxable value than you are to say your big box store with the giant parking lot. Right. There's studies out there that support all that.
And so now there's 300 residences in the townhouses. Right. How many total residences in the condos? And are those condos and or apartments, kind of a combination?
Yeah, there were 2, I guess what I would call high-rise buildings for Woodstock, but they're probably more mid-rise. They're 5-story buildings. There are 2 of them. One is really long, and it was done so well that everybody thinks that it's a historic mill building. They always ask us when it was renovated, and we always have to tell them it's brand new construction from 2004.
But it looks like a mill.
Right. And then there's a smaller white building that after the recession came out, somebody did buy that, and they turned those into rental units. So I think there's 60 or so multifamily, either rental or condo in those 2 buildings out of the 300 or so total residential units.
Okay, so that probably multiplies to close to 1,000 people at least between the units.
I would say with children and everything.
Yeah, it could be more than that. Okay,
yeah.
I've already been through the land use part of it and got that done. We're in our town of Crestview. In our basic core old historic in that area, you had to either own or manage the business to live above or behind. Now we'll be able to have, as our previous planner had said, about 3,000 people could live within a core area. And of course what we've got happening in our town, and I'll show you pictures later, we have a new 60,000 square foot courthouse building under construction on the site of the original courthouse. And it's big. And the city and the county just bought a piece of land that had an old abandoned Piggly Wiggly store in it, and that's going to become some more parking. And so that's where we're at. And part of my purpose is to show the people of our community, look what they've done in these other communities and how it was done and what the life is like. And the evening life we saw yesterday evening, and we stopped at a restaurant over on the west side and ate. And we got there just as their little concert was ending, but the food was great. But so you've got, how many total places to eat are there in that little core area?
Yeah, so before we call, the name of that project is Woodstock Downtown. And before Woodstock Downtown started, there were probably about 3 restaurants downtown, and now we're up to 22. So And that's not the only project. So on the west side behind where you're talking about, there's actually an apartment complex.
We saw that, yes.
Woodstock West. They, the same developer that developed Woodstock Downtown, had put another 32 acres under contract on the west side of the street.
Okay.
And they, during the recession, sort of lost all that back to the banks and to the private owners that they had put options on it with. And the city took a real proactive role in two things. We bought real estate from the banks. We bought real estate for parking, and we bought real estate for an art center that existed in the city already. Except for that they were out in an industrial park that nobody really knew about them or really felt like going out to this metal building in an industrial park. So we bought a building for our future city hall at the corner of what I'd call Main and Main, so Main Street and Town Lake Parkway. And it was actually the original Baptist church in town, and now it's one of the biggest churches in the southeast. It's out off Highway 92 called First Baptist Woodstock. There was a community church in there that we bought that property from, and it had the old church that was from like 1913 that we turned into our city council chambers, and the new old church from the 50s or the 60s that we leased to the art center for their theater programming for $1 a year. So we got their theater programming downtown immediately, and all the dollars that go with that as far as how much people spend when they go to the arts before or after, going out for food and drink and shopping and all that stuff. But then we also bought 4.5 acres that was adjacent to the apartment community, and we gave that also to the art center for $1 a year, and they're developing a 4.5 acre art center that eventually they'll build a new theater over there, but there's an old house that they're renovating into art studios. The apartment developer actually flattened a piece of land and landscaped it for an outdoor event green, they call it. The DDA and Main Street program, and a private contributor built an outdoor stage out there that we have small concerts on, things like that. So the apartment developer came in, in 2000, we probably turned down 3 or 4 different sort of developments that were just single level houses or things that we didn't really want to see. And there were a couple of things council really was adamant about doing, and this came out of that LCI plan also. Was that we needed parallel north-south streets to expand kind of a grid network in downtown, because Main Street's the only one that goes north and south. So we wanted, local residents to be able to use other streets. And that was all very important to us when we sat down and started planning. So this apartment developer came in and put the 26 of the 32 acres under contract. And walked in with it, and again, sort of had the same attitude as the other people did, where we have this under contract, we want to work with you, what do you want to see us do? So they've developed, I believe, 400 units over there now. The first phase was 300, and they just added another 100 units, and they've got 8 or 9 townhouses that are for rent. And they drive the highest rental rates in the county by far because of the location of the apartment complex. So they worked with us on that grid network. The city did put in about $2 million for public infrastructure, but we got 2 grid streets out of it, and we got 400 public parking spaces out of it. So those are all on-street parking. They do have some private parking for their residents behind the buildings.
Now, you mentioned your city government. I gather you have a council manager form of government?
We do. We've got a weak mayor and council manager form of government. So the mayor leads the vision and leads the meetings and, attends all the stuff he needs to attend, but he only votes in the case of ties.
Oh, okay.
So he votes, I think last Monday might have been the 3rd time I've seen him vote in the 10 years, I guess it's been 11 years now that he's been mayor. So.
Okay. Does Georgia have what we have in Florida called a sunshine law, where 2 members of a government body cannot talk to each other about anything except in the meeting if it pertains to something they're going to vote on?
We've got a quorum, so we can't have a majority of them together. So 3 or more we can't have together at the same time. Okay. I don't think it's quite as strict as what you just mentioned.
Yeah, Florida's pretty strict on that. So basically, the growth of Woodstock has happened in the last 10, 15 years.
Well, the growth of Woodstock really started in early 2000s through annexations and suburban residential development. We had about 8,000 residents in 2000 or so, and we're up to about 30,000 now. So there was a big jump from 2000 to 2009 where we went from 8,000 to 22,000 or something. And then after that, it slowed down, obviously, and now it's starting to pick back up.
Okay.
we're actually, I think, the 5th fastest growing city in the United States at some point in the mid-2000s.
I would guess so, yes. Well, we were at 9,000 in Crestview in 1990, and we're pushing 23, 24 in the city limits, but we're like everybody else. I have the University of West Florida every couple of years do what we call a circle study. And within 5 miles of my radio station, which is just on the northwest corner of the town, there's 44,000 people. And of course we have, because of our military base, just one major highway going north and south, where you've got multiples here. You've got, 41 and 75 and 575. And I gather part of your city, I noticed we were coming up 575. I saw Woodstock city limit sign a pretty good bit south before we got to the 92 exit.
Yeah, it's about a mile south from there. A couple of years ago, they just annexed all the right-of-way from 575 into the city so that our public safety people could actually respond to accidents there instead of the state doing it. So. Now,
does Georgia require that it has to be voluntary annexation by the property owner to bring them in, or can a city here actually say, we want that in our city and do it?
I believe a city can do that in Georgia, but we do not do that. It is all voluntary. Now, with the case of the right-of-way, the state assembly actually had to do that for us since it's state-owned property. But yeah, we don't force annexations on anybody. We've got a lot. The way we've grown is we've got a lot of holes in between where we've grown and not. So typically, the county will send somebody wanting to do something in one of those holes to us to talk about annexation. And usually it works out pretty well. But we're sort of, the Cobb County line is at that sign you saw about a mile south of 92, so we can't go into Cobb County.
Yeah.
We've got Corps of Engineers property with the Lake Allatoona basin north of us, and we've got existing kind of suburban development on the east and west, so we don't have much more ways for us to grow outward. So now it's infill and filling thing. We can't really grow up either because of the Corps of Engineers property, and there's another city up north of us called Holly Springs that has come down to that. So.
Well, I meant by growing up with more condos, stacking them 5 floors tall.
Yeah, right.
Is there any more prospects of any more additional shopping area, or is that pretty much what it's going to be, what's on East Main?
In downtown specifically? There's a little bit more. We're starting to see some commercial growth further up North Main Street and more of that kind of neighborhood commercial feel where it'll have a little bit of commercial space. We've got a couple projects that may fill out kind of. The city owns some property that we're working on a city center project that will address some parking with, hopefully with a parking deck, trying to entice a hotel to come downtown with some conference space. We've got a couple office users that are actually based here that are looking to expand, that we're hoping to get them in buildings so we can grow our employment base here. We're an out-commute county, so 70% of our workforce leaves the county every day to go to work in Atlanta or Alpharetta or Cumberland Mall area. So we're trying to reverse that by getting some corporations to locate here. They all like it for the quality of life, obviously. But, so now we just need to convince them they need to all work here.
Right. In Florida, we have what's called CRAs, Community Redevelopment Agencies, where a city can designate a certain portion of their city, as we have, as a blighted area, needs redevelopment, and usually they're a 30-year plan. You then have what's called a CRA director. Now, do you have anything comparable? What is the city of Woodstock's funding for all of these projects and stuff that you've done?
So the $2 million we put into the grid streets, I believe, came from our SPLOS, which is special local option sales tax. That's an extra cent on the sales tax that goes to very, very identified projects. Like it's on the ballot to extend it in November. And one of the projects we put in there is $6 million to parking improvements for downtown if the SPLOS should pass. So I believe that was the $2 million there. We've used they've used the DDA before, because the DDA can issue bonds in a different way than the city can. So as long as it's a project within our boundary, we can issue those bonds, and the city backstops that with city funds. And then also we have a urban redevelopment authority, which sounds similar to what you just mentioned, where they do have to declare a blighted area, and we've used that to purchase property as well. So
in Florida's case, counties don't like CRAs much because the way it works, let's say you have a $100,000 building, you create the district, and that $100,000 building, let's say, has a tax bill of $1,000, city combined with county for their ad valorem tax. And then 5 years later, that's a $150,000 building in value. So there's another $500 in new tax, and that $500 extra doesn't go to the county or city general, it goes to the CRA. And so whatever the county share, city share, goes only to that CRA. In our case, in our early years, because our Main Street program was both state certified and nationally, we were one of 10 out of 50 Florida Main Street programs that were nationally certified. A couple of extra points makes the difference on a CBD, Central Community Development Block Grants, they called them back then. So we went through 3 in a row of $750,000, which redid a lot of the downtown, the lights, landscaping. Now it's time to move on to other things as we do it.
And actually, we have something called a tax allocation district here, which sounds very similar to that, where it does freeze the current property tax structure when you put the TAD in place. And the city gets to keep the difference for that. Unfortunately, when we went through that and did that in 2008, it's controlled by the mayor and council, so it doesn't have its own board or governing board or anything like that. Was around the time that all the school boards, it was the school boards that got real mad about not getting the incremental money for it, because a lot of them were being used for residential development, which obviously puts strain on the schools, and they're not getting the stuff out of it. But so we've got that. We don't get a lot of funding from it because we lost the school board's portion of it, and that's our biggest taxable value or tax generator, I guess, in the county. So we can do small projects with it. Now, the streetscape you see on Main Street came after the Woodstock Downtown project. It was about a $1.2 million project, and so the LCI program that I talked about early on that had planning phases, they also have project phases, so you can ask for money for projects that are identified within your LCI plan. And that streetscape was an LCI. We got money through the state of Georgia, through the regional commission, which comes from GDOT actually, and got the money for that streetscape out of that. And the local share is only 20% of those projects. We're actually about to let another one of those in March that will continue it a little bit further south.
Okay, Trae has a question.
I do want to ask you to talk a little bit more about you talked earlier about the vision planning, that you guys sat down and hashed out what you wanted to do, such as planning an extra road for your local residents to have access to use. How did that process work? Who all was involved, and how did you handle those that were against the vision? Because I know there's always somebody that's a naysayer, there's always somebody that doesn't want to do it. Did you have issues with that? Were there developer or landowners within that area that didn't want this to happen?
I was not here for the original 2002 plan, so I can't really speak to that. Now, you do, with the LCI program, you do a 10-year update, so we did an update in 2012 where we looked at what has happened since then and what changes we might need to make and stuff like that. Fortunately, our community has embraced what's happened here. I mean, it went from kind of that sleepy little town to kind of a, mini urban center that most people are, we just did a lot of branding for our visitor center, which we run too. So we actually came up with the tagline, "A City Unexpected," because like you were here, in the 80s, and most people come back, and even kids, they grew up here and went to the high schools here and go away to college, and they say, "I'm never going back to Woodstock again." A few of them have come back and actually opened businesses here. So when we did that update in 2012, we didn't have a whole lot of, that was around the time the apartment complex was coming in, so we were getting some of that. We don't want apartments, we don't want transient people, they don't invest in the community, that type of stuff. But for the most part, I think the landowners that were around, and we don't have any huge major landowners, like you may own 4 or 5 acres, but you don't own 90 acres in downtown, right? So the conversations I remember being were not necessarily about, you're going to make me put a road through it, but they knew that may open up development opportunities. Right. Something I didn't really touch on is after the Woodstock downtown thing, because it was illegally zoned. CBD didn't allow people to live in it or whatever, so they did basically a planned unit development. We call it site plan specific. In 2004 or 5, they actually went in and rezoned all of downtown into a downtown master plan. So they upped all of the densities that people could have from, basically 2 units an acre to sometimes 12 units an acre, depending on where you are. But they also put very strict architectural controls. They put very strict streetscape standards. So you're spending a lot more money on that public infrastructure outside of your buildings, but we're by right giving you a lot more units that you can build.
Okay.
And in certain areas like our central business district, you mentioned a courthouse. One of the things that I think has made us pretty successful, we don't have a courthouse, so we don't have all the attorneys that go along with the courthouse. Mm-hmm. Our county seat up in Canton struggles because they've got the courthouse up there, and they've got first floor attorneys' offices all over the place, and they've struggled a little bit. They're coming around now really well with commercial development, but in the recession, a lot of our older buildings were being rented out by like a roofing contractor or a real estate agent or whatever, and you could stand there on Main Street and watch people walk to that building, and get bored with it and turn around and walk the other way. So one of the things we did is we went in during that time and disallowed office uses on the ground floor within the main shopping district. So it's a very defined small area, but you can't have offices on that. You can have them on the second floor. You can have them accessed from the alley in the back of the building. So if you had a retail store up front and an office in the back, you could do that.